In our headlines on this Wednesday, March 12th, here in South Korea. Ukraine embraces a U.S. proposed 30-day truce with Russia following marathon talks in Saudi Arabia between delegations from Kyiv and Washington. And the White House confirms the implementation of 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminium imports into the American market starting today. Meanwhile, fresh employment data by Statistics Korea on this Wednesday shows a second month of expansion with 136,000 jobs added in February. Ukraine is prepared to accept a U.S. proposed 30-day truce with Russia. The question now is, will the Kremlin be willing to do the same? Our correspondent Peunji covers this prospect and more.
Talks between senior officials from the U.S. and Ukraine that took place in Saudi Arabia appear to have been fruitful, as Kyiv agreed to a proposal for an initial 30-day ceasefire with Russia. In a joint statement on Tuesday, the U.S. agreed to resume military aid and intelligence sharing with Ukraine, immediately after Kyiv said it was ready to accept the peace deal proposed by Washington. The two sides also said they'll conclude an agreement for developing Ukraine's critical mineral resources as soon as possible. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who led the U.S. delegation to the talks, said Washington would present the ceasefire offer to the Kremlin, noting that it's now up to Russia to end the fighting.
Hopefully we'll take this offer now to the Russians, and we hope that they'll say yes, to peace. The ball is now in their court.
But how Moscow might respond is far from certain. U.S. President Donald Trump also said he hopes Russia agrees to the ceasefire proposal, hinting that he may talk to Russian President Vladimir Putin about it possibly this week. He added that he's willing to invite Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky back to the White House.
Get the Russians to agree?
I'll talk to Vladimir Putin, yeah.
When will
I
you
want to
talk
get,
to
look, that's the other, it takes two to tango, as they say, right? So hopefully he'll also agree. And
Zelensky, who was in Saudi Arabia but did not participate in the talks, said the ceasefire was a positive proposal, but stressed that Washington must convince Moscow to agree to it as well.
Ukraine accepts this proposal. We consider it positive. We are ready to take such a step, and the United States of America must convince Russia to do the same.
European leaders welcomed the 30-day ceasefire proposal, saying the EU is ready to play its full part in the upcoming peace negotiations, while also adding that this is a positive development that can be a step towards lasting peace for Ukraine. Peunji, Arirang News.
And the first set of blanket U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminium imports into the American market is in place as of this Wednesday. Our Yoon has the latest.
The 25% steel and aluminum tariff announced by U.S. President Donald Trump went into effect on Wednesday. According to an executive order signed by Trump last month, the 25% tariff is imposed on all steel, aluminum, and derivative products imported by the U.S. at 12:01 a.m. 166 derivative products, including bolts, nuts, and springs, are subject to tariffs starting on Wednesday, while 87 derivative items, including bumpers, suspensions, automobile parts, home appliance parts, and aircraft parts, are exempt from tariffs until further notice by the U.S. Commerce Department. This also means that South Korea's existing free trade quota on steel and aluminum of 2.63 million tons per year, which it has with the U.S., will be scrapped as well. However, as the duty is applied to all countries, South Korea will not be at a disadvantage in competition with major exporters, while economists believe that Korean steel companies will be able to enter the U.S. market more actively as the export volume cap is removed. Meanwhile, amid concerns of a full-out tariff war between the U.S. and Canada, the Trump administration announced Tuesday that it has decided to withdraw the additional 25% tariff on Canadian steel and aluminum imports. Trump had threatened to impose an additional 25% for a total 50% tariff on Canadian steel and aluminum imports after Ontario threatened to impose a 25% surcharge for electricity imported by the U.S. Ontario Premier Doug Ford announced that he had agreed to suspend the 25% surcharge on electricity after holding talks with U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. The two will hold talks again on Thursday along with the U.S. trade representative to discuss renewing the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Free Trade Act ahead of the April 2nd reciprocal tariff deadline set by Trump. 이가은, Arirang News.
Right against that backdrop, what are the broader implications of U.S. import duties on steel and aluminium for South Korean businesses? Our correspondent Moon Hae-ryun takes a look.
With the Trump administration's 25% tariffs on steel and aluminium imports kicking in starting Wednesday, South Korean firms are bracing for impact. Previously, exports were duty-free but capped at 2.63 million tons under a quota system. Now the quota is gone, but all shipments will face the tariffs, posing both risks and opportunities. As tariffs now apply to top exporters Canada, Mexico and Brazil, South Korea, the fourth largest supplier to the U.S., may find new openings in the U.S. market. Still, the risks are significant, with intense competition such as cheaper steel products from Southeast Asia, as well as the inclusion of steel and aluminium-derived products, such as bolts, nuts and springs, under the new tariff scheme. These products are primarily manufactured by small and medium-sized businesses, which have fewer resources to absorb the impact, making them especially vulnerable to financial losses. At a conference on Wednesday led by the Ministry of SMEs and Startups, industry insiders spoke up about their concerns. Shinjin Fasteners is one such company that produces nuts and bolts, with 35% of its sales dependent on exports to the US and Europe.
Developing new products to stay competitive isn't easy, especially when it comes to sourcing materials. It's not like there's a set supply from the start. You have to create value and generate demand through product development.
Another company, GJ Aluminium, discussed the challenges of diversifying its exports.
We're trying to focus more on Europe and Southeast Asia. But the challenge is that our facilities have primarily been set up for the U.S. market, and each of these new regions has very different requirements and characteristics.
In order to minimize the impact on domestic firms, the South Korean government is building a support system such as stabilization funds and 15 nationwide support centers, as well as gathering opinions.
It looks to be around 1,800 domestic farms that are currently exporting to the U.S. We want to move quickly with a survey to get a clearer picture of the expected impact and what kind of targeted support these businesses will need.
Following Industry Minister An Duk-geun's visit to Washington to establish a communication channel with the Trump administration regarding tariffs, the country's Minister for Trade is also due to visit the U.S. to continue talks. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the U.S. cattle industry has called on the Trump administration to push South Korea to lift its ban on American beef from cattle over 30 months old. A formal request to this end was submitted by the National Cattlemen's Beef Association to U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer on Tuesday. South Korea put in place the age restriction on U.S. beef back in the year 2008 amid concerns of a mad cow disease. The U.S. Beef Association is now urging for an end to this restriction, pointing out that countries like China, Japan and Taiwan have since removed similar barriers. Fresh employment data shared by Statistics Korea show 136,000 jobs were added on year in February, but employers in construction manufacturing industries remained reluctant to make new hires. Our Moon Ji-young covers the latest findings.
The number of people in employment grew by 136,000 last month, marking 2 consecutive months of growth. However, the employment of young people remains sluggish. According to data released by Statistics Korea on Wednesday, the number of people employed last month increased by over 130,000 compared to the same month the previous year, bringing the total to 28.1 million. In terms of individual sectors, the manufacturing sector has experienced 8 consecutive months of decline since last July. The construction sector saw employment shrink for the 10th consecutive month compared to the previous year, primarily due to a downturn in the construction industry. However, the healthcare and social assistance, science and technology services, and ICT sectors all added jobs. Employment rose by 0.2 percentage points for those aged between 15 to 64. However, The employment rate for those aged 15 to 29 recorded the sharpest decline since January 2021, dropping by 1.7 percentage points to 44.3%.
The unemployment rate remained at 3.2% compared to last month. The number of unemployed individuals rose by 25,000 to 940,000 year on year.
The number of people unemployed aged between 15 and 29 increased by 5,000, with the unemployment rate for this group recorded at 7%. The number of people choosing not to work aged between 15 and 29 was recorded at 504,000, surpassing the 500,000 mark for the first time since statistics began being collected in 2003. At a ministerial economic meeting on Wednesday, the government pledged to improve labor market conditions through a fourth-quarter livelihood and economic support plan. It also vowed to create high-value-added jobs in emerging industries, including AI, and to enhance working conditions for researchers in the semiconductor sector. 문지영, Arirang News.
We turn now to the Constitutional Court as speculation abounds over the date of the ruling on President Yoon Suk-yeol's impeachment. For more on this, I have our political correspondent Shin Ha-young standing by live at the court. Ha-young, it's good to have you on. So when can we expect to hear the court's verdict on the president's political fate?
Well, Sunny, today was the expected day for the announcement of the ruling date based on the initial expectation that the verdict would be delivered this Friday. However, we are still waiting for the Constitutional Court to announce this. And this means that considering previous presidential impeachment trials, when the dates came out 2 to 3 days in advance, the chances of a ruling this week now seem less likely. And since the final hearing last month, the court has been holding deliberations almost every day for the past 2 weeks, excluding holidays and weekends. And despite this, it has already been the longest deliberation period of presidential impeachment trials. And if the ruling comes next week, it will also set the record for the longest time from the impeachment of a president to the final verdict. And it is reportedly known that Yoon's case is taking longer because there are many contested issues. And also with the impeachment verdicts on the chief state auditor and 3 top prosecutors scheduled for tomorrow, it's expected that Yoon's case will likely be pushed back to next week, as it's rare for the court to issue major rulings on consecutive days. And if the ruling happens early next week, there may be a notice by the end of this week, so we'll need to keep an eye on this.
I see. Moving on then, Ha-young, does the president's recent release from detainment look to affect the Constitutional Court's ruling on his impeachment?
Well, the general consensus in the legal circle is that it won't have much impact. And this is because the issue with the detention cancellation mainly concerns how the period is calculated, which is different from the impeachment trial that focused on the declaration of martial law. However, as a Seoul court ruling on Yoon's detention also highlighted procedural flaws in the investigative process, some say it could put some pressure on the Constitutional Court. An official from the court said the judges will assess whether there is any impact, but noted that the investigation records from the CIO were not used in the impeachment trial, so it's unlikely to have a significant effect. And following the detention cancellation, there were calls from the ruling party for hearings in the impeachment trial to resume. However, so far, there's been no move from President Yoon's side asking for a resumption. And if more hearings are held, there are concerns that a delay in the ruling could lead to more pressure from the opposition party over the appointment of Constitutional Court Justice nominee Ma Eun-hyuk, a left-leaning judge recommended by the opposition Democratic Party.
Right, and in the meantime, Ha-young, I hear protests for and against the president remain intense. Do tell us more about that.
Sure, Sunny. I can definitely say that both the size and volume of rallies are growing in front of the court ahead of the verdict. And also the political battle between the rival parties is escalating outside the National Assembly. The main opposition Democratic Party began a march from the assembly to Gwanghwamun this afternoon, calling for Yoon's impeachment. And the ruling People Power Party said it wouldn't hold protest or pressure the Constitutional Court, but some of its members are staging relay protest in front of the court. And also today, PPP lawmakers visited the court and submitted their second petition to appeal for the court to dismiss Yoon's impeachment. And meanwhile, police are considering issuing the highest emergency level on the day of the ruling, which would allow them to mobilize up to 100% of available police officers. And additionally, they have requested the Land Ministry to temporarily impose a no-fly zone over the Constitutional Court. And that's all I have for this hour. Back to you, Sunny.
All right, Hayoung, thank you for that coverage. That was our political correspondent Shin Hayoung reporting live from the Constitutional Court. Moving on to the defense front now, South Korean and U.S. forces are holding their annual training session, which is also the first major joint exercise since the return of the Trump administration to the White House. Our defense correspondent Kim Bo-kyung has more.
Troops aboard KU-1 Suryeon utility helicopters approach the landing zone. While the U.S. soldiers keep watch, Korean soldiers conduct air assaults. About 400 troops from the ROK Army's 1st Infantry Division and the U.S. 2nd Infantry Division ROK-U.S. Combined Division's Stryker Brigade held joint exercises on Tuesday. The drill at a training facility in Paju City is part of the Allies' computer-simulated Freedom Shield exercise that began its 11-day run on Monday. It aimed to strengthen South Korean-led combined operations capabilities with an ROK Army battalion commander directing U.S. company operations.
Through thorough war games, from helicopter boarding to capturing the objective, South Korean and U.S. troops were able to move as one. In particular, by sharing combat expertise between the two countries' forces, we were able to further enhance our combat capabilities.
So we were very fortunate that we can conduct this combined training with the Republic of Korean Army. It is a great learning opportunity for my soldiers and myself to increase interoperability with the Republic of Korea Army and to strengthen the alliance.
In connection to Freedom Shield, the Navy's 2nd Fleet also led an integrated port defense drill at the western port of Pyeongtaek, Dangjin. Responsible for guarding the west coast, the Korean Navy aimed to boost response procedures for aerial, chemical, biological, and radiological threats against the port and many other critical national infrastructure sites, along with the Army, Police, and Coast Guard.
We will continue to protect key facilities in the West Sea with a strong and close-knit coordination system with relevant agencies.
The on-field drills are to continue until March 20th. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
And in related news, North Korea continues to condemn the annual training session between South Korea and the U.S. The regime state media on Wednesday called the joint exercise the root of worsening tensions on the Korean peninsula. It also made reference to the accidental bombing by South Korean fighter jets of a residential area near the border, emphasizing that the situation could have had severe consequences if the bombs had been dropped a little further north. Meanwhile, on Tuesday, the White House denounced North Korea's launch of multiple missiles into the West Sea this past Monday, while reaffirming the ironclad alliance between Seoul and Washington. Hasukjip, it's the Korean word for a boarding house that rents out a room with the option of a meal or two every day. Now, this form of accommodation was quite popular among college students here in Seoul up until the late 1990s, and it's been making a huge comeback in recent days. Our Park Geon-woo tells us why.
A small, quiet living room filled with university students. That's because a variety of 15 side dishes that might be quite costly at a restaurant are served twice a day at mealtime at this boarding house. These dishes are all cooked by the owner herself, who says it's a joy to prepare them for the students. Communal meals at boarding houses were common in South Korea up until the late 1990s, but as millennials began prioritizing privacy, studio flats have become more popular since then. However, students living here today say privacy isn't that much of a concern, as there are bigger benefits.
Since I live in Seoul, eating out is quite expensive. I spend about 50K per day, but that's how much I would save by eating here.
More students are choosing boarding houses to keep costs down.
During COVID-19, there were almost no students, but after the pandemic, demand surged even among foreign students.
I came from another country. It's quite expensive. I don't cook that much, no time, more convenient compared to other places.
This boarding house, built decades ago and showing its age, has become increasingly popular with every single room booked. And it's not just this house, but according to data, boarding house reservations rose by around 20% in the first 2 months of this year compared to last year. An official from an online accommodation platform added that boarding houses are cost-effective for students, especially when compared to other housing options.
In Korean style, like we say, the one room, like 1 month's price is more than 700,000 won. Boarding house, there are no deposit, and the average price is like 400,000 won, include the meals.
As boarding houses offer students an affordable option in an era of high costs, with rent, meals, and utility bills all included, this trend is expected to continue among students on a limited budget. Park Gon-woo, Arirang News.
This is The World Now, bringing you the latest stories from around the globe. Starting off in the Philippines, where the country's former leader, Rodrigo Duterte, has been arrested at the request of the International Criminal Court for his controversial war on drugs campaign, which was a defining aspect of his presidency. Serving from 2016 to 2022, Duterte has been accused of having thousands of suspected drug dealers killed. The ICC estimates that somewhere between 12,000 to 13,000 people could have been killed. Early in the week at a Hong Kong rally, Duterte declared he was ready to be arrested and said, "What is my sin? I did everything in my time for peace and a peaceful life for the Filipino people." In Pakistan, militants have attacked a train and killed at least 10 people, including the driver and security staff, in the country's southwestern province of Balochistan. The Baloch Liberation Army claimed responsibility for the attack on Tuesday afternoon on the Jafar Express train traveling from Quetta to Peshawar, with some 450 passengers on board. According to CNN, police surrounded the train and were involved in an exchange of fire with militants. The report also said 104 passengers had been released on Tuesday night. The BLA said it is seeking the release of political prisoners, activists, and missing persons related to the group, which it says has been abducted by the military. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif denounced the attack. In Argentina, a trial over the death of football legend Diego Maradona began on Tuesday in Buenos Aires. 7 medical professionals who were involved in caring for the World Cup winner faced the court in San Isidro, charged with culpable homicide. Among those accused are Maradona's former psychiatrist and doctor who were treating him leading up to his death in November 2020. An 8th member of the medical team is set for trial in July. Prosecutors plan to present substantial evidence, including private messages between the doctor and patient, to support their case. In the United Kingdom, Chester Zoo is celebrating the birth of a rare Cockerel cephalica, a species of lemur commonly known as a dancing lemur. The lemur was born on January 20th, with the zoo saying every new birth is a huge cause for celebration. According to the zoo, the dancing lemurs get their nickname as they can stand upright and spring from side to side as if they're dancing. Cockerel cephalicas are an endangered species and can only be found in the northwestern forests of Madagascar. Walter Lee, Arirang News.
With the whole country clouded today, it rained a little in the Seoul metropolitan area, western parts of Gangwon-do province and Jeju Island. From tomorrow to the weekend, the weather will continue to be as warm as early April, with Seoul rising up to 14 degrees Celsius tomorrow. However, due to the yellow dust overnight, the concentration of fine dust will stay at bad levels in most parts of the country. Incheon, Sejong, and the Chungcheongdo provinces will have very bad levels of fine dust. Please wear a protective mask when you go outside. Tomorrow morning will be very similar to today. Seoul and Daejeon will start off at 3 degrees and Busan at 7 degrees. Daily highs will move up to 15 degrees in Chuncheon, Daejeon, and Gwangju, 17 degrees in Daegu. On Sunday, there's rain forecast across the country, along with a cold snap. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Right, that ends our newscast for now. Thank you for watching.